Doña Carmela fell to her knees as tears streamed down her cheeks. Laughter could be heard in the background as she begged them not to take away the last of her 4 children, the only one she had left and the one who was her companion in her old age. But the officer in charge gave the old woman a disdainful look. "Get up, you old fool. Don't you understand that your son's duty is to the country?" That was the worst day of Doña Carmela's life. She saw her beloved Edmundo depart from her arms, just as his brothers had. She knew well that the possibility that he would not return was very significant since things on the country's border were getting worse. That situation had been going on for years, and the big commanders were still recruiting the youngest to go to the front to defend their country. The only thing that Doña Carmela had received for her beloved sons was a letter from the governor, who expressed his condolences for their loss, but nothing more. She was heartbroken every time they knocked on her humble door, but thank God, she had always had Edmundo by her side to support and sustain her when her world was falling apart. But now he would be no more, and the old woman would be left alone at home with great anguish, praying to the Lord that one day she would see her son safe and sound again. The train that carried all the young people who were going to serve the nation was full of many souls who were sobbing and saying goodbye to their families. Doña Carmela stared at nothing as the train left and finally realized that now she had to fend for herself. She had to work in her humble land and pray to avoid saying goodbye to her son again. When she was still young, the old woman used to plant all kinds of tubers and vegetables. Some vegetables and fruits that helped her get a few coins to exchange for other basic foodstuffs. She mistreated her hands and exposed herself to the radiant sun to feed her children since they could be humble but never lacked something to eat. Lately, due to her arthritis, the old woman had to rely on the world to do all those chores. But now she worked from sunrise to sunset to clear her mind and to be able to get some food. One day while Doña Carmela was resting after a hard day in the fields, the unmistakable sound of a knock on the door echoed throughout her humble abode. She was not expecting anyone that afternoon, so with trembling legs due to the fear she felt, the old woman went to open the door on the other side. A face full of tears told Doña Carmela that something terrible had happened. It was Maria, a very noble young lady who used to go out with her son. The girl hugged her when she saw her, and the old lady desperately asked her what had happened. "Tell me now, girl, do you have any news about Edmundo?" But to the old woman's surprise, Maria shook her head. Then she took a few steps back and with her voice cracking she said, "My mother has thrown me out of the house, Doña Carmela. I have nowhere to go. A few days ago, I discovered that I am pregnant, and the little one I am carrying in my belly belongs to her son. Unfortunately, my mother does not accept my condition. She says that I am a gift and that I dishonor her family." Doña Carmela pitied the young woman, and although at the moment she was devastated by her mother's rejection, that was terrific news. Something that brightened the days of the old woman, who took care of the girl with illusion, because inside her womb was her grandchild, so she welcomed Maria in her humble home. The young girl became the old woman's right-hand woman, helping her to harvest her produce and sell it at the small market in the village, which was far from the house where they lived. The poor girl, still with a big belly, used to walk long distances to collect a few coins. That pregnancy had given back the will to live to Doña Carmela, who waited anxiously every day to receive at least one letter from her son to know that he was well, but above all, to tell him that her son was on his way and to say to him that he should take care of himself there on the border so that someday he would meet him. The months passed, and the two women were excitedly counting the days until the baby's arrival. They did not know that the baby would come early and would allow them to get to the hospital in town as they had planned. Maria went into labor in the middle of the field, and Doña Carmela had to help her get out of the house, where she laid her on her bed while trying to figure out how they would get to town if they did not have mobility. At that moment, the old woman regretted that Edmundo would not be here because he would have done everything in his power to ensure that his beloved was well, even if he had carried her in his arms to the place. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and now Doña Carmela would have to manage to deliver her grandchild. The old woman put water on to boil while she placed cold water cloths on Maria's forehead, who screamed as the unmistakable contractions told her that her child was about to be born. Doña Carmela held her hand and encouraged her to continue. She had had 4 children and thought she knew what she was doing very well. However, the truth is that this case was different because Maria had been in the same situation for many hours and had not achieved anything. The woman was fragile and in tears. Her mother-in-law told her that she could not take it anymore. The old woman would not let her fall asleep, so in an hour, Maria had her little boy in her arms, whom she named Daniel. Minutes after kissing her son, she fell fast asleep, and Doña Carmela took care of her grandson, whom she lulled in her arms, leaving her daughter-in-law to rest. The hours passed, and the old woman approached Maria to hand her little one to her. But great was her surprise when she took Maria's hand and found it flaccid and very pale. Doña Carmela desperately looked for her daughter-in-law's pulse, but it was too late. The poor thing had not been able to resist. The old woman cried and cradled her grandson, trying to find strength in him. Now, what would she do alone with a little one? Desperate, the old woman began to walk around her house, thinking about what to do, but the only thing that came to her mind was to go in search of her son. The next day, Doña Carmela sought help from her neighbors, who lent her a hand and supported her in giving her daughter-in-law a dignified rest since she did not have the money for such an event. They also pitied her and little Daniel, who had not eaten since the day before, and gave him a few liters of milk to drink. After all that, they were left alone at home, waiting for news from Edmundo. Unfortunately, the few provisions they had were running out, so Doña Carmela decided she would sell the only leather shoes she had, which her late husband had made from the hide of a cow, and with the money, she would go to the capital in search of her son. Thus, the old woman set out with her grandson in her arms and a large bundle on her back, carrying the few crops she had left. She intended to sell them along the way to obtain more coins and thus buy milk for her beloved grandson, who was very weak because of his poor diet. Doña Carmela walked so much that her feet began to hurt. She spent her nights in the open, sleeping with her grandson, wrapped in all the blankets she could carry. She would also stop in every town she could find and lay out a shawl in which she would place her products to sell. In this way, and after many difficulties, she reached the big city after several days of traveling in the hope that someone would give her news of her son. The old woman prayed every day that he would be well because if not, she did not know what would become of her little grandson. Lately, Doña Carmela had begun to feel very ill and feared that soon she would no longer be able to care for him, so he would be left alone. That was what led her to walk to the central office where Colonel Restrepo was, the man who had sent her son to the front and the only one who could give her an answer about his whereabouts. The old woman presented herself to the secretary of the place, who informed her that she had to leave, and all this before she said a single word upon seeing her from head to toe. Doña Carmela felt watched by everyone, but nothing mattered to her, and disobeying the woman's orders, she asked to speak to the man in charge. They all laughed at her, pointed the way to the exit, and threw her out of the place. Doña Carmela had come too far to give up, so making her way through all the people in the office, she reached the colonel's office, who, upon seeing her, frowned and a shout rang from his throat. "Who let this beggar in? On top of that, she brings the little louse. Get him out of my sight," the man snarled. But before the authorities entered the place to take her away, the old woman, between sobs, told him, "I am Edmundo Garcia's mother. Colonel, I want to know if he is alive. I am carrying your little boy in my arms since he has no one else in this world, and I am afraid that I am too ill to continue caring. I need to know when he will be coming home." Everyone in the office waited for Colonel Restrepo to give the order to send the old woman away, but he looked at the woman with wide eyes and did something that stunned everyone. The man burst into tears as if he were a little child, then asked everyone to leave and leave him alone with Doña Carmela. "You see, my lady, I am sorry to see you treated that way. If I had known who you were, believe me, things would be different. I regret to inform you that your son has fallen at the border, but I must admit he was a true hero. That boy you raised had a heart of gold, and I will be grateful to him until the end of my days. Edmundo Garcia gave his life for my son, who also went with him to serve the country. But now my boy is home thanks to your son's bravery." The news left Doña Carmela devastated. She had faith that Edmundo would be well, and when he returned, he would be in charge of little David, who would soon be left helpless because she doubted that he could resist any longer. With her eyes full of tears, she looked at the little boy she was cradling in her arms, and something in her heart broke, for she feared she would have to give him up for adoption. Colonel Restrepo looked at the old woman and realized her desperation, so he offered her all his help. He took her hand and said, Dear lady, I will take care of you and Edmundo's son as a token of my gratitude to him. I will not let you lack anything, and when you are no longer in this world, I will adopt David as he were my son. I promise you that. Dear friends, this is the end of today's story. I hope it has touched your heart. Thank you for your visit. I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to be aware every time we upload a new video.